During the Cold War, there was another race happening, not visible, not publicly discussed, but just as serious, because it wasn't about weapons or territory or space. It was about the mind, because while one side focused on technology, the other began exploring something less tangible, less understood, but potentially just as powerful. The idea was simple. Could thoughts be transmitted from one person to another, not through speech, not through signals, but directly, mind to mind? At first, it sounds abstract, theoretical, something that belongs in speculation. But it didn't stay there, because research began, funded, organized, structured, programs designed to test whether the human brain could do more than process information, whether it could send it, receive it, influence it, across distance, across barriers, without any known medium. Participants were placed in controlled environments, separated by distance, sometimes by walls, sometimes by multiple layers of shielding, designed to block all known forms of communication. No sound, no light, no electromagnetic interference, nothing that could carry a signal, at least nothing that was understood. And within those conditions, they attempted to communicate. Simple at first. Numbers, shapes, images. One person focusing, the other attempting to receive. Not guessing randomly, but attempting to detect something that wasn't being physically transmitted. Some experiments reported results. Not consistent, not perfect, but above random chance. Enough to be recorded, enough to be studied further, because randomness follows patterns, statistical ones, and when results fall outside those patterns, it raises a question, not about certainty, but about possibility, because even small deviations suggest something is happening, even if it isn't understood. And that was enough. Enough to continue. Enough to expand the research. Because if something works even slightly, it becomes worth exploring. Especially in an environment where advantage matters, where even a small edge can change outcomes. The experiments didn't stay simple. They evolved, moved beyond basic transmission, into influence. The idea that thoughts could be directed, that perception could be altered, that behavior could be affected without physical interaction, without visible cause. Because if the mind can receive information, it may also be able to be influenced by it. And that's where the research shifts from communication to control. Not openly, not directly, but in theory, in testing, in attempts to determine whether influence could occur without awareness. Some reports describe individuals who showed stronger results, more consistent, more precise. Subjects who could identify targets with higher accuracy, who could receive information with less variation. And those individuals became the focus, studied more closely, tested further, pushed beyond initial limits. Because if something works better in some people, it can be developed, refined, possibly replicated. And that potential is what drives research forward. There were also attempts to scale the process, to move from controlled environments to real-world application, not confirmed, not fully documented, but referenced indirectly. Because once something shows possibility, it moves beyond testing into strategy, into consideration, into whether it can be used. And if it can be used, how? At the same time, this research didn't go unnoticed. Information moved quietly through intelligence channels. Other nations became aware that something was being studied, that experiments were taking place, and that created concern. Because if one side develops something, even partially, the other has to respond. Not necessarily because it works perfectly, but because it might. And might is enough. That concern led to parallel programs, research designed to explore the same questions, to determine whether the claims were valid or whether they were part of something else. Because not all information in conflict is accurate. Some of it is strategic, designed to influence perception, to create uncertainty, to make an opponent believe something exists, whether it does or not, because belief alone can change behavior. But the Soviet research continued, expanding, testing, exploring areas that didn't have clear boundaries, where science and speculation began to overlap. Because when something isn't fully understood, the limits aren't defined, which means they can be pushed further, repeatedly, until something changes, or until the results become too inconsistent to continue. Eventually, much of this research was dismissed, labeled inconclusive, unreliable, difficult to replicate, because consistency is required for acceptance, and without it, something remains theoretical, but dismissal doesn't erase the effort, because the investment itself is significant. Time, resources, personnel allocated to something that may not produce clear results, which raises a question. Why invest that much into something with no foundation unless there was something there, even if it wasn't stable, even if it wasn't controllable, even if it wasn't fully understood? Because research doesn't always produce answers. Sometimes it produces signals, indications, possibilities, enough to continue, even without certainty. And that's where this remains. Not proven, not confirmed, but not completely dismissed. Because the idea persists that the mind, under certain conditions, may be capable of more. More than processing. More than reacting. Possibly transmitting. Possibly receiving. Possibly influencing. Without physical connection. Without visible interaction. And if that's true, even partially, then communication doesn't require distance. Control doesn't require contact. And influence doesn't need to be seen, because the most effective signals are the ones you don't know you received, and the ones you believe came from you.